Hey everyone, well, it's right at 1:15, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 5 of Healthy Habits, Eat Well, Be Well. And we are finally talking about hydration and all the reasons why we need to stay hydrated. So the first thing to look at and consider, I love this graphic, just showing you how much of the human body is actually made up of water. The average adult is over 70% water. It does vary. Children and babies are actually more water. Their bodies have a greater percentage of water. And seniors, typically people over about age 65, tend to have significantly less water, somewhere under 70, sometimes closer to 60%, which means they're at much greater risk for dehydration, in large part because they don't have the ability to regulate their temperature as much, and many other things. Children are actually at greater risk of dehydration simply because even though they're more water, their sweating and cooling mechanisms are usually not fully developed until their adolescence. So smaller children are actually at a greater risk for getting dehydrated. So some of the major roles of fluid in our body. One of the first is, of course, transporting nutrients and oxygen to all of our cells and aiding in absorption. Keeping in mind our blood is actually more than 70% water. Moisturizes the air in our lungs. The old saying, fog a mirror, every time you exhale, there's moisture there that's absolutely necessary for the diffusion of oxygen in our lungs. And of course, it aids in digestion and overall colon health. The major role of the colon, actually no nutrients are absorbed there, but the major role is reabsorption of water so that we can eliminate things. Being dehydrated can have a major effect on that is not comfortable. Keeps skin looking young and reduces signs of aging. Chronic dehydration can actually significantly affect the elasticity in your skin and lead to premature wrinkles and aging. So something to keep in mind, especially for those of us in Arizona or sunny California. So keeping muscles strong and active during exercise, very important. Our bodies are actually, not sure why that just did that, so sorry about that. Our muscles are more than 70% water as well. One of the other major roles, of course, regulating body temperature, which is primarily done through sweating. And as you sweat and the sweat evaporates, your body cools down through convection. That becomes a major issue when it's hot and humid. When it's normally dry in Arizona, we don't tend to get as overheated just because our sweat evaporates sometimes before we even know we're sweating. Right now, it's a little bit more humid, and you notice that instead of evaporating, the sweat just rolls right off your body, which does nothing to cool you at all. So those are some important considerations. Boosts cognitive function. So even mild dehydration can significantly affect mental clarity, decision-making, and other functions in our brain. And we're going to look at a photo of what a dehydrated brain looks like, and it kind of gives you a little bit better idea. But we lose some of that decision-making ability when we get dehydrated. And I'll tell you a little story about that here before we're done. Carries toxins out of our body through sweat, yes, but primarily through our kidneys. Increases metabolism and energy levels, and of course, lubricates our joints and muscles. Some of the major benefits of hydration. So again, considering that water is involved with almost every biological function in the body, metabolism slows down significantly when it's in a dehydrated state. When your body doesn't have adequate amounts of water, your muscles slow down dramatically. Again, remembering we just said our muscles are over 70% water. So when they're not fully hydrated, their ability to generate energy is very limited. Your body's ability to utilize fat, to metabolize fat, actually, or carbohydrate as fuel is also very restricted when we're in a dehydrated state. So especially people that tend to be chronically dehydrated, this can become a major issue, slowing the metabolism down. Part of that is the body trying to preserve itself as well, because the metabolism actually heats us up. And so if we're already dehydrated and we're already maybe too warm, that's a preservation method as well. If you want to know more scientific information about that, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have by email or whatever. But I did link an article in here about specifically this through the National Institutes of Health. If you want to check that out, it's a very sciencey, scholarly article, one of the major medical publications. So startling photo here, the hydrated brain versus the dehydrated brain. And you can actually see in the dehydrated brain, it almost looks like there's holes there. Now those aren't actually really holes, but you can tell as the tissues shrink back, you can kind of almost see why it would be hard for normal nerve transmission, for the normal things that happen in our brains. This is one of the major reasons we begin to become confused, not as mentally alert, and other things can be affected in our brain, in our thinking capacity when we're not adequately hydrated. All right, so what are the signs and symptoms? So dry or sticky mouth. However, I do like to point out that a lot of medications can cause dry mouth. There's many medications out there. That's one of the side effects. So that's not necessarily always the best indication. However, I mean, thirst certainly is, but for the most part, by the time we realize that we're thirsty, we're already on the way to being dehydrated. So that's an important consideration as well. Drinking to our thirst, that can work sometimes, but not all the time, especially when it is really hot and humid and it's hard to keep on top of it. Headaches, being sluggish. If you've ever been significantly dehydrated, you might know what that feels like. I've had it happen many times. Unfortunately, it almost feels like you're walking through quicksand. Nothing feels good when you're dehydrated. You might feel weak. People can pass out when they become significantly dehydrated, which is a whole nother problem. Being lethargic, irritable, again, dizzy, dark urine. And we're going to look at a startling photo of what that actually looks like here in a moment. You actually can stop sweating. So this is one of the major signs and symptoms of heat illness. In other words, heat stroke or heat exhaustion. At a certain point when our bodies have gotten so hot, the sweating mechanism actually shuts down in an attempt to conserve energy. If you are ever in a situation where you should be sweating because it's hot and it's humid outside and you stop sweating and you actually get goosebumps and almost feel chilly, that is a major red flag that you are not only significantly dehydrated, but probably at major risk for heat stroke if you don't cool your body down very quickly. Heart palpitations, and I'll explain that a little bit more shortly. Poor skin turgor, what that means, you can see in these photos here, your skin should be actually very elastic. So if you can pull the skin on the back of your arm or on the back of your hand, and it does not go immediately back to where it was, but it stays in what's called this tented position here, that's an indication that you are significantly dehydrated. Another one on the bottom, and this is a big flag too, hunger and thirst often feel the same. One of the things that I usually suggest to people is if they feel more hungry than usual, to try to drink some water first. And I know I've experienced this in many situations, especially in the summer. Your body, one of the natural reactions is to stimulate our appetite. So if you are suddenly hungrier than you usually are, and you're maybe not so great about drinking water, try to drink 6 or 8 ounces of water before you eat and give it 10 minutes. If after 10 minutes you still feel hungry, then by all means, have a snack, eat whatever you were going to eat. But you might not be hungry in 10 minutes. You might find that actually your hunger went away, and that means that you just really needed water. So either way, we have a win-win because you get more hydrated and you might end up eating less. Color of your urine. Isn't that a great photo? If you are in this end of the spectrum, you're doing okay. If your pee is darker than the average lemonade, you are definitely on your way to dehydration. If it's starting to look dark or orange, you are significantly dehydrated. If you're getting to the point where you can almost not see through it or you can't pee, that is a major red flag. And I would either go to the doctor immediately or even go to the emergency room because you might need IV fluids at that point. And I can tell you personally, when that has happened to me, that is one of the major things is that you're not able to actually pee. So that's a significant sign. So a little bit more here about the physiological response to dehydration. When we don't have enough fluid, our body releases stress hormones because that is a stressful situation. So these stress hormones are essential steroids in our body that are secreted from our adrenaline glands. So think like cortisol, like your fight or flight hormones, and they can either act in a beneficial way or not. They can act as an anti-inflammatory or a pro-inflammatory, depending on the amount of stress that the body is under. Their primary role is to restore what's called homeostasis, which is the place that our bodies always want to be. So during times of acute stress, they can actually cause inflammation. So once those are really starting to be released, we have a whole cascade of events that happens. So as we already talked about, reduced mental acuity, memory, and energy. Our immune systems can be compromised. We're going to feel hungry when we're not, and our metabolisms are going to be slow. That's a recipe for our bodies not being very healthy in many, many ways. So some dehydrators. There are some things that we put into our bodies that lead to further dehydration. So before we even talk about these, I want to note right here that we absolutely need a certain amount of sugar, carbohydrate, good carbohydrate, but we need a certain amount of that, and we need a certain amount of sodium in order for our bodies to be able to utilize water. If we don't have enough sugar or enough sodium in our blood, the water cannot get into our cells. Our cells are all surrounded by what's called a lipid bilayer. Think what happens with water and oil. They don't mix. So that sodium is a carrier molecule. It is actually going to pull the water into our cells. So without enough, the water just kind of bounces off the outside. However, with that in mind, too much sugar or too much sodium can cause the opposite effect. So where that comes into play is a little bit more with the sugar. It's a little bit more for people that are diabetic or have issues with insulin and sugar regulation. But when our blood sugar stays higher than it should be, it makes our blood very acidic. Human life is only sustainable within a very narrow pH range, and our body will do whatever it has to sustain that. So when our blood starts to get acidic, either from too much sugar or too much alcohol, it will do whatever it can to get rid of it, and we start peeing a lot more. If you know anyone who is diabetic, one of the signs and symptoms, particularly of type 2 diabetes, is not only increased thirst, but significant increased urination. And this is one of the major reasons why. Another reason that I'll go into in a second here, excessive animal protein. For those who are diabetic, when their bodies can't absorb the sugar, their bodies start breaking down their lean muscle tissue, trying to turn it into sugar, which just continues to make their blood sugar higher. That can cause a whole cascade of events that can lead to not only excessive urination, but long-term can lead to kidney damage, and is one of the main reasons that people with advanced type 2 diabetes end up on dialysis. But even for the average person, I know I mentioned this a little bit in our nutrition presentation, and that is there is no need to exceed more than 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, especially if we're looking at animal protein. Those guidelines are a lot more flexible if you're a vegetarian or you're not eating very much animal protein at all. But with animal protein, and this is supposed to look like beef jerky, not sure if it does, but that was the goal. So carbohydrate and fat and protein are all made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Protein has a nitrogen molecule on it. Our bodies have to get that nitrogen molecule off, and it has to get rid of it. So excessive amounts of animal protein means our body is going to pee a lot trying to get that nitrogen out. So short term, that may not cause a whole lot of damage, except that it does lead to dehydration. That is actually one of the major reasons that people see rapid weight loss when they start a low carbohydrate diet. Most of that weight loss is actually coming from the fluid. So again, that's a whole nother conversation that we've had a little bit, but I'm happy to answer more questions about that if you have them. So Heidi, how much do I need? That's a great question. Well, it depends on the size of your body. It depends on what kind of environment you're in, your activity level, your age, and lots of other different things. That old just drink 8 glasses does not work for everyone, because those of you who know me know I am 4 foot nothing. My husband is 5'11" and he's 160 pounds. Our fluid needs are going to be different. So all things created equal, shooting for a half to 1 ounce of water per pound of body weight is usually a great place to be. However, again, if you are someone that's exercising at great intensity in a hot, humid environment, let's say, you know, a landscaper, a construction worker, people that are outside in the elements, they're going to need significantly more. So we have to take those things into consideration. Also, if you're sick, if you have like a stomach flu, you're throwing up, or you have diarrhea, you're going to lose excessive amounts of water, likely very quickly. And in those instances, it's very possible you may end up needing an IV to reverse that. Fever, same thing. That's raising your body temperature, and it's going to lead to dehydration ultimately. But again, types of activity. If you want to know a lot more about hydration, because I could talk about it all day, I have linked another article here by Precision Nutrition, some very helpful information there that goes a little bit above and beyond what we have the time to share today. But hyponatremia, is it possible to drink too much? It is actually. And so I do want to, I think I need to mention that briefly. Personally, I have had it happen to me. It is not fun. I do not recommend it. But hyponatremia basically occurs when we drink too much water too quickly. And what ultimately ends up happening is all the sodium gets flushed out of your body. Well, remember what we said about our cell membranes. We need those salt molecules, those sodium molecules, to actually pull the water into our cells, understanding that too much is not a good thing either. When our sodium levels drop too low and we have all this water floating around, so we drank too much, the water can't get into our cells. So the cell itself is dehydrated, but we've got all this water floating around in our body. And it actually is very dangerous for more reasons than dehydration even. We have all the issues with dehydration, but then it can put too much pressure on your brain and people die from that. Some brilliant radio DJ in Texas many years ago, you may have heard of this, decided to have a water drinking contest. Sounds harmless. Let's see how much water we can drink the fastest. Well, the person who won the contest died from that. They drank so much water so quickly, they had too much pressure on their brain and had irreparable brain damage. So something to be aware of. Most people are not at giant risk of that, and usually their dietary sodium is enough to counteract it. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, I had been doing a triathlon. This was many, many, many years ago. I don't do those anymore, in a hot, humid environment. But I started getting disoriented, confused. I could tell I was starting to get dehydrated, but remember what I said about the memory and the mental function, I started to not have as much decision-making rationale as I should have. So I kept drinking water, kept drinking water, kept drinking water. They actually did not have sports drinks. This was a million years ago. And in thinking back about it, if I had licked my arm, because I was in a dry environment, I had salt everywhere, I probably would have been okay. But what basically ends up happening is you start throwing up. I couldn't walk in a straight line. I couldn't think straight. I ended up having to go to the emergency room. And they're basically what they said was if I had been any lower in sodium, they would have had to give me a saline IV. However, I needed to not eat or not drink anything for 36 hours and eat salty foods. Again, that is not super common, but if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, there are actually warning signs about that, about hiking in the summer and the need for electrolytes more than just water. Something to consider. Anyway, so 70 to 80% of hydration comes from beverages. 20 to 30% actually comes from foods, especially water-rich produce. So you don't necessarily have to drink till you float. If you're eating some healthy produce, that's actually going to really contribute to your hydration level overall. So what does that look like? Just some percentages here. Things like cucumbers, lettuce, celery, watermelon. We're looking at over 90% water. And actually, I almost consider, well, not just me personally, but we almost consider cucumbers and celery to be like negative foods because it's harder for your body to break it down than the amount of calories that are contained in it. Now, if you go thinking you're going to eat a giant plate of celery and be a fat burning machine, you're going to have other problems. So do it in moderation. However, if you want to crunch on something, you need to get more water anyways, you're looking for a snack, cucumbers and celery, you can't go wrong. An entire watermelon, I mean a giant entire watermelon is like 100 calories. You can eat an awful lot of watermelon, and I guarantee if you do, you'll be too full to maybe eat some of those junk foods that you don't want to eat. So a great thing to have in the summer. So we already talked about this a little bit, but signs and symptoms of heat-related illness. So of course, weakness, headache, dizziness, muscle cramping. If you get muscle cramps, that's usually an indication that you are dehydrated. Something that I would see as an exercise physiologist is when you're dehydrated, your heart rate will go up much faster than normal, and it has a hard time coming down. We'll talk about that more in a second. If you stop sweating, you get chills, you're nauseous. Not a good sign. Heat exhaustion, very dangerous. The loss of fluids and electrolytes meaning things like sodium, potassium, those minerals that are required for normal fluid exchange and muscle contraction are lost due to prolonged periods of time in the heat, allowing the body to cool down, especially if that's coupled with activity. So the signs and symptoms are again very similar. However, one of the big signs here is that stopping sweating. Their skin will be red, dry, they tend to get the chills, they become very weak, disoriented. One of the best things you can do is put something like ice packs or wet washcloths behind their neck, under their armpits, and actually in the groin, because that's where the major arteries are that will carry blood to the organs and will help to cool it down. Heat stroke is what happens when heat exhaustion is not treated and can continue. Heat stroke is extremely dangerous. People die from this every year. I personally know of some people. There was a runner in Virginia several years ago who was very well trained, very elite athlete, doing a speed workout in the middle of the afternoon, had heat stroke, was taken to the emergency room, and actually died 3 days later, even though he was treated, because as our body temperatures stay high for too long, if we're too dehydrated, sometimes that cooling mechanism in our brain can be irreparably damaged. So it's very serious. Back in the day when football players for college and things like that were getting ready, they would do double sessions and full pads in the heat of the day. And a lot of the coaches would say, drinking is a sign of weakness. Well, we know that's not the case anymore, and they're much more aware of it. However, heat stroke, because of things like that, does kill people every year. So something to be really aware of. Some of the things that are a little bit different, if you come across someone that it seems like heat stroke is what's happened to them, they're very dizzy, they've maybe lost consciousness, actually don't give them something to drink, call 911 right away. Still try to cool them down by placing something cold behind their neck, under their armpits, or in their groin. But because their state of consciousness may be altered, they may choke actually on the fluid that you're giving them, and it can lead to them actually throwing up, which is what happened to me. In that case, that person probably needs to go to the emergency room and needs IV fluids. All right, so a little bit more what we've been talking about, especially with performance, actually as little as 2% dehydration, if you are an athlete, if you're exercising at all, can significantly inhibit your performance. So one of the major considerations, the visual I want you to get here, is considering that your blood is more than 70% water. If you are significantly dehydrated, your blood gets very thick, very sticky, and it's hard for your heart to pump it. So your cardiac output goes down. You can't get enough oxygen and nutrients to your cells because it's not able to pump as much blood with every beat. So your breathing is more labored. We're not getting as much blood flow to the skin. All sorts of bad things happen. So something really to kind of keep in mind. That's what I mentioned about the heart rate going up. So when I used to do clinical exercise testing and I would have heart monitors on people, if their heart rates would shoot up very quickly and they wouldn't come down, one of my first questions was, how much water have you had to drink today? Because that's a significant sign. All right, hydrating for exercise. So 1 to 2 hours before, somewhere between 16 and 20 ounces. Again, that's going to vary on your fitness level, your body size, and all that. Maintaining hydration for optimal performance, or just to make sure that our bodies stay hydrated during our workouts, 4 to 6 gulps every 15 minutes. If you're someone who's working out for less than an hour in a well air-conditioned, ventilated environment, this is not as much of a big deal. You definitely still need to drink, but it becomes so much more critical if you're outside where the intensity level is significant, or if it's humid and the sweat is just dripping off of you and not evaporating. Replacing fluids lost during exercise. So those people running around in rubberized suits trying to drop weight, it's extremely dangerous. They are really putting their bodies at risk. Again, wrestlers die from that every year as well. If you are losing significant fluid during a workout, you need to restore that. You want to aim for 20 ounces of water for every pound of body weight lost. However, I put a note here, sip, don't chug. If you slam a lot of water really quickly, you're number one, going to get nauseous. You may start throwing up, which is not going to help. And your body is not going to be able to process that really well. It's better to just continually sip throughout the day rather than gulp large amounts at once. Sports drinks. We have to talk about sports drinks. Not everyone exercising needs Gatorade. Kids playing soccer in a hot environment need Gatorade. Elite athletes, people who are working out in an intense way for more than an hour, hot and humid environments, yes, they're going to need those extra electrolytes and possibly the carbohydrate as well. But most people for a regular workout do not need that. It's extra calories, it's extra sugar that you probably don't need. So take that into consideration. People do ask about, well, what about coconut water? Could I use that instead of a sports drink? Well, in some instances, yeah, that might work really well. It does have more potassium, it has less sodium if that's a concern, but if you're a very salty sweater, someone who maybe needs sodium, that may not be ideal. It may not be suitable. The unflavored versions may not be enough for someone who's exercising at great intensity. But, you know, if you're doing just a, let's say a 45-minute run outside and it is really hot and humid outside, you know, coconut water might be actually just what you need. Caffeine. Gotta talk about caffeine. We all love our coffee. Well, a lot of people do. We absolutely know that caffeine does boost performance. It does increase energy expenditure and metabolism slightly. Before you get all excited, one of the things about that is a lot of the research indicates that beneficial effects may decrease with tolerance. So if you're someone who hasn't had coffee a lot, when I first started drinking coffee, I could barely drink a half a cup and I did not like the feeling. I got very jittery very quickly. Those effects start to wear off. Everyone knows people, or maybe you're that person that you started off with 1 cup and now you need 4 to get the same effect. So while caffeine can enhance performance, it does increase our body temperature. It actually does help mobilize free fatty acids. We're looking at a maximum benefit usually of around 79 calories per day, which over time, you know, can certainly add up. That's at a maximal level of 300 milligrams of caffeine per day, which is kind of a lot. That is what's sort of been determined to be the upper tolerable limit before you're going to start having negative side effects. However, always want to keep in mind, remember, I'm 4 foot nothing. 300 milligrams of caffeine is going to affect me a lot differently than it's going to affect my 5'11" husband who weighs 160 pounds. So body size, fitness level really have to come into play there. So that's a ballpark. So over here, just kind of gave some caffeine content of the more common caffeinated beverages. So we definitely know, you know, there are a lot of benefits to it. However, just like everything else, if we overdo it, we might have other problems. Nervousness, being jittery, trouble sleeping, rapid heartbeats. People actually have died from overdoing caffeine. Things like Red Bull, Monster drinks, stuff like that. They don't know when to stop drinking them, and that rapid heartbeat can lead to a heart attack. So you need to be aware. Everyone needs to be aware. What's good in moderation may not be good if we get too much of it, just like everything else. So here's another tip. Diet soda. We already talked about excessive amounts of sugar. So regular soda is certainly not the best thing for hydration, but diet soda, there's a lot of controversy over this, but a lot of the research is really showing not only does it have artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives, which can cause gastrointestinal distress, but when your body tastes that sweet, those artificial sweeteners, it stimulates your appetite. Some people with type 2 diabetes actually have major hypoglycemic effects from drinking diet soda, even though there's no calories in it technically. Long term, it can really mess with your sugar metabolism and lead you to end up eating more than you would have. It also can cause headaches. All sodas, especially the dark colas, have what's called phosphoric acid in them. In addition to eroding tooth enamel, they also leach calcium out of your bones. So if you're someone who might be at risk for osteoporosis and that's not something you'd feel, it can be pulling calcium out of your bones without you even knowing it. But think about this too. You know what they use to clean roadkill? Coke. To clean battery corrosion? Coke. To clean your toilet? Coke. Yeah, interesting to think about. Anyway, know that I'm saying this as a person who has had a serious soda addiction throughout my life. And I have very warm, fuzzy feelings about it in a lot of ways, because as I've mentioned on previous presentations, my grandfather managed a 7-Up plant for the greater part of my life, which means I kind of have this association and a little bit of a warm fuzzy with it. And I know that if I have it in my house, I'm going to want to drink it. But as the challenge, I save that for a special occasion. I have it very rarely. I found that things like seltzer water, anything that's fizzy, really, I love that. We actually have a Soda Stream. I don't know if you've seen those. They're not that expensive. It takes regular tap water and you have a CO2 cartridge, and in less than 10 seconds, you've got carbonated water. Some of the fruit and vegetable infused waters can be great as well. There are lots of different ways to meet your hydration levels other than soda. And again, understanding that that can certainly be something that people are very attached to for many reasons. All right, so some action items and checklist here. This is not something you have to do all of them if you're not someone that struggles with this, but you know, if you are someone that struggles with hydration, always have a water bottle within reach. If you have a water bottle near your desk, fill it up, you know, don't let it ever get empty. If you need to, if you're someone that does struggle with it, there's a ton of these little water tracker apps. Maybe we'll even do a hydration challenge coming up, a safe one. But if you're hungry, drink something first. Drink a little bit before you eat, see how you feel. I think one of the challenges that I love the most, in addition to that one, is maybe try to add a watery fruit or vegetable each day if you're not someone that's already eating that sort of thing. If you need to, set hydration alarms or reminders. If you can, get sparkling water or unsweet tea instead of soda. And I will be sending out some of these water infused recipes when I send out the slideshow and the recording later on. So if no one has any questions, I'm going to cut you loose. I know that was a lot of information. Thanks so much for tuning in today, everyone.